a lot of people in town, at least, especially in the jazz scene, have met you and know you, but a lot of them might not know kind of how you got started playing. Tell me about that.
I guess my introduction to the piano is through my parents, which is probably like a lot of us. My mom was extremely successful vocalist. We're from LA area, and just started me on piano lessons. She's a vocalist, so it's like that kind of thing. Like, well, if I start my son in piano, then maybe I'll have an accompanist. And so I grew up in a musical household. Took traditional classical lessons. Really young. And I think right about like at the end of high school, I got really interested in jazz. I was already like switching over and doing some marching stuff and doing that thing growing up in Houston. And was listening to a lot of neo soul and hip hop with the classical background and being like, oh man, this is incredible music. Like, obviously it's jazz influenced.
Right.
And so I originally wanted to be a producer. And so I wanted to hone in on my skills, and I knew jazz would get me there. And so I went to college to pursue, being a jazz major with that in mind, and totally got off track. Like, yeah.
But in a good way.
Yeah, in a good way. I mean, it opened up a whole new world for me, Never really played with people. And so when I got to college, I just had to, like, learn how to play piano all over again. Jazz was a completely different thing, and I never really, like, improvised. Not alone, played with people.
Right.
And so it was great. It was really eye-opening.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's interesting. And man, a friend of mine in Wichita, he did piano forever, and it was always alone as well.
Yeah.
He'd never played in groups before, and us in orchestra, like that's all. Well, private lessons we always play by ourselves, but in general we always play in groups. So it was was that kind of a really weird thing going from the group?
It was a little weird, because the role is different, and so like switching over from like a classical background and not having a lot of like direction in jazz early on. Even the way you look at the music. It's like now you're reading chord changes with these symbols that you have to memorize, and even though you're playing what's technically in the chord, it doesn't sound right because you don't have the right voicing. So you have to know these things that aren't on the paper. And coming from the classical background, like everything's on the paper. And then you get to the the part where you improvise or solo, and everyone's just like, well, play what you want to play, but it's not really playing what. You're playing what you want to play, but there's definitely a lot more to that.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of, like, working it out and knowing what fits, and then you can kind of step out and have the freedom.
Right.
And so just getting used to that, it took a while, which I'm sure it's the same for, everyone that starts at jazz. I just kind of got started really late.
Yeah.
Wasn't one of those dudes who, like, auditioned for college and a jazz and, like, was playing confirmation and, like, all these tunes. Like, I was, like, dreaming of playing that stuff. And it was, like, probably till my junior year where I'd had a handle on, jazz enough to, like, play those songs and have the chords and have done enough listening and homework. So a little bit of a late bloomer.
Right, yeah, and that's really always funny because for me, coming from classical as well, but sort of understand, like we're both at that situation now where we totally understand at least mentally what's going on when people are on stage playing this jazz stuff. But it's always funny when the people that have a lot of theory in their head where they've played some Rachmaninoff and crap. I mean, they've got some talent. I mean, they've done they've done millions of chords, but it's funny when you already have sort of the technique to play, but you're so used to not making any decisions. Right, is what you got to do in jazz. Well, you don't have to make any damn decisions. Your accent is here, and it's this quarter note there, and Right. Like, so was that decision making thing like? Were you typically really heavy ear or reading or?
Man, my ear was actually pretty bad. And I remember like. What really got me interested into it is like I was in high school and I was listening to Jill Scott really heavily, and it's like third or fourth track where she's doing this poem on Who Is Jill Scott album, which is like one of my favorites, and it's like I was listening and trying to figure that out because we had lunch, and at lunch you could go, everyone had lunch, but like you could go and kind of roam the school at lunchtime, so I stayed in the band room, and I spent hours trying to figure that out. and I knew it was only like 3 chords, but I didn't know how to hear that, you know. And so my ear wasn't really good. It was all reading, you know. And as I got better at it, and as I just started to like have more patience and what we call transcribe, but just learning songs by ear, it took a minute, and it was very frustrating because like no one I didn't have anyone to be like, oh dude, like listen to the bass, then try to figure out the chord, you know, and then go about it like that. You know, I'm just trying to like hear what's going on. And so the decision making, you know, that's the thing about classical. As we get older and we study, like, you know, you go to the college regime and you take music history and you do all that, you realize that like a lot of these great classical musicians and pianists were great improvisers, and a lot of their pieces are contrived by like improvising and then later written down. But like in the system now, like took classical lessons more than half my life, and no one ever taught me how to improvise. No one ever talked about it. And so like you say, like someone like that can play Rachmaninoff has all this great technique and is playing all these chords, but in actuality, very few of them probably know what chords they're playing. Very few of them actually take the time to like, beside know what key they're in, like know how these chords fit together to make cool progressions.
You're right.
So like the decision making, like you don't even know what you're doing. At least I didn't, and I could play. You know, I did. You know, just because I went to college doesn't mean like I didn't study classical still. I was actually pretty angry that I had to fill those requirements. And so I didn't know. You know.
Well, they don't need to know.
They don't need to know.
They don't need to know. They don't need to know that this is a 13th and whatever. I mean, they just went and you line it up and you're on second beat of measure, blah, blah, blah. And with the rest of the orchestra, you just play your F sharp and then you're good.
And I think the ones that do know and take the extra time to figure it out and like mess with those, you know, those potential things are the really great classical or just really great musicians in general. I also learned that like, man, I was bummed that I never really grew up playing in church because I was on the opposite end of that. Like I was, you know, in big band, not able to play, but because I could read, I was like sitting over a church guy's shoulder and like kind of helping him decipher the music, but like looking down at his hands and listening to like the decisions he was making. And then I kind of just learned how to play jazz piano like that.
Yeah, that's
like
funny. This
says C minor 7, he's playing this. Why is there a D and an F there?
Right.
Sounds really cool, but it's not making sense to me, you know, but it just sounded right to him.
Right.
And so I kind of just started putting that together, and it was very interesting, actually. Yeah. It was very interesting.
That's a huge thing, because I had a bunch of friends of mine in Wichita that we all were in kind of jam band, kind of, you know, Fish kind of bands, and they were all, you know, you could tell that they were talented, and when somebody would give them like a 7/8, they're all over it, you know. I mean, like rhythm wise and chord wise, but I would venture to say that a lot of them didn't know what they were doing. They had the ear and they could just do it, and you know, definitely odd meter stuff just blew me away. Like I was pretty good with odd meter too, but they would do rock riffs and these crazy, and they followed it like no problem, but a lot of them were like, they'd go up and do this guitar chord. They don't know what the hell that chord is, you know, it's a ninth.
But their ears is allowing them to make these decisions that just feel real natural. Which is like, I guess at the end of the day, like, when I teach, I mean, I almost lean that way. That's what you want.
Yeah.
It's like, if your ear is making these decisions that, like, sound cool and are justified because they sound cool, at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. Now, if we can go the extra mile and, like, say, like, oh, this is what I did, I know I can do this, then, like, man, then the sky is the limit.
Right.
But if the ear is there,
I know.
Well, you don't really need anything.
Yeah, so, and then, so you just mentioned college a minute ago, so, like, I know for me, because I started really young, and I had a long time where I was in that camp where I could just do it, and I didn't really understand what I was doing, and I was just and play. But when I got to college, that's the big thing that I learned from college is, what the hell am I doing? Oh, this is a C minor, diminished blah 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 chord, and the reason why Beethoven did this was because of the era and the bows, and I learned all this knowledge. So now I feel like my brain, like my playing ability was way past where my brain was, but now it's like totally the opposite. Like my brain understands it, but I can't do it yet. Like jazz is a great example. You know, I totally get what they're doing, but I can't do Cherokee at 300. You know, I just can't do it. You know, it's like I get it. But so when you were at college, like let's kind of maybe start with the good first. Like what was did you have a huge eye-opening experience at college, or how was the music department specifically?
I don't know. I think my college experience was like really different from a lot of the guys that I've met recent. Like, you know, because I'm in Kansas City now. I grew up in Houston. I went to a smaller college that had a small music program, and the jazz program was fairly new. While the school, you know, I went to Texas Southern, and the school in the neighborhood has this great history of music and musicians coming from there. It was just a really, you know, there wasn't a lot of jazz direction. I didn't have like a jazz applied piano teacher just because the program in the school
They just didn't have it,
and in the environment they just didn't have it, which might be the case for some people. And so I think the most eye-opening thing to me was just like seeing how great my peers were. Like for the first 3 years of, you know, my jazz experience, it wasn't having a teacher and listening and transcribing so much. It was a lot of listening, but it was learning from the people around me because they had it. You know, they just had it, and a lot of those guys were great church musicians who like now we're older have like Grammy, Stella Awards, you know, ASCAP Awards. Like they're amazing musicians, and I still look up to them. So I got the opportunity to learn from like real guys that were doing it. I think they were just in the classes I was in because like they were bored in the daytime, or they just wanted the theory. You know, that we were there for like opposite reasons.
Yeah.
And so that was a lot of my experience, and going to jam sessions and hearing how it was done and seeing how it was done, and a lot of looking over people's shoulders and deciphering it and making sense for me.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
You know, opposed to like the super collegiate thing of like, you know, when you go to Berkeley, that's not the case at all.
Yeah.
You know, you have a teacher.
It's really
They're putting
hardcore.
you, it's really hardcore, and I just kind of like had this freeform thing. I think I think there's pros and cons to that personally for me. But now that I'm older, I credit like me having my sound to that. You know, I kind of just had this theoretical thing that I thought would work. You know, as far as like approaching the improvisation. And that kind of developed my own sound and my own decisions and habits and stuff like that.
You mean approaching it like that you didn't, it wasn't just structured like crazy for you, and that's what made your sound, is that you just came at it kind of haphazard?
Right. Well, I just kind of came at it to like what made sense to me first.
Yeah.
It's like, you
That's
know,
interesting.
I love theory and stuff, so I said, okay, well, these chords are going by. At some point, if I know what fits over them color-wise or like combination of colors that fits over these chords, then I can choose which ones I want to play.
Yeah.
If I know them better, then I could just play them as they go by and make those decisions. And it worked, but then, you know, you're neglecting like phrasing and these other things you get from transcribing that really help you put together you know, a solo and a story when you're improvising. So by the time I graduated, like I could play through, you know, I mean, like it was kind of put together, but because I had lacked a couple of things, it still needed work.
Oh, sure.
You know?
And that's interesting because like my thing with learning improv was doing a lot of in this rock band that I was playing in, and these guys were doing jammy fish kind of stuff, so it was very improvised. But it wasn't quite as many changes as a Cherokee or some of the jazz stuff, but it was still like heavy improvisation. And because of how much ear I had at the beginning, I didn't even sight read till like 10, and I'd started 3, you know, so it's like I had 6 years of ear before. And so the way I learned improv, it was a very specific way because I had listened to so much music. Well, when I'm with my students, I want to do what you just said of give it to them very structured. But what's hilarious is that that's not even the way that I learned, because I did, at least improv wise, I didn't learn improv structured at all. I learned music structured, but not improv. And so like the way I want to teach them is not the way that like hardly anybody learns how to do improv, but I want to teach them the way that I learned, but I can't because they're not listening to near as much music as I was, and they don't have the ear, and they have is sight reading, and like, so I don't know like how to deal with that really, you know, because I think you're absolutely right that if I just tell them, then it's a bunch of little Robs running around, and it's not Billy, you know, doing Billy over Cherokee. It's Billy doing Rob over Cherokee. You know, he's doing the teacher over Cherokee instead of his own voice, his own, and like, I don't know how to deal with that except for that they'd have to go through something similar to what I did, at least with like listening constantly.